Hello YouTube, it's Hauntown here, and today I'll be reviewing Connection: The Nightmare Within, a survival horror title that feels like an unholy fusion of The Evil Within and Resident Evil series of games. The story follows Michael Stone, a private investigator that looks like David Duchovny in perpetual Chadface. Stone first joined the police force in order to catch his mother's killer, whose death still haunts him since he never managed to bring the perpetrator to justice, and eventually quit law enforcement after being overwhelmed by the brutality of the crimes he had to solve. However, there's no rest for the wicked, as he is now thrust into the worst case of his life after a series of mind attacks on unsuspecting citizens lead to him learning about the existence of mind-space terrorism, a form of mental assault that makes humans believe they're being hunted by monsters, with the experience being so intense that any injuries they receive during the ordeals are actually reflected on their bodies. Stone is recruited by a special FBI unit in order to infiltrate the mind of the person responsible for the technology that made mind-space attacks possible in the first place, and that's when things go haywire. To say that I was incredibly impressed by the game's cinematic presentation would be a gross understatement, with each cutscene making me feel as if I was watching a really cool B-movie due to both decent direction as well as some surprisingly solid performances from the majority of the voice cast involved. The overall narrative was further enhanced by beautiful visuals as well as the nature of the setting itself, namely the mind of a disturbed individual, which did give way to some horrific situations, though I'll admit that the game didn't take full advantage of its storytelling power, neither in terms of the surreally dreadful possibilities human imagination is capable of, nor of the story's potential itself, in general coming off as mostly having scratched the surface of those things instead of fully embracing its ridiculous premise and running home with it in a way similar to the Evil Within games. Still, it placed way more effort than average in its lore building and ambience, which was highly appreciated. Combat here is largely inspired by the modern Resident Evil games, adopting an over-the-shoulder camera angle when it comes to aiming and movement, though I do need to mention that you also have the option of playing the whole thing with a fixed camera view for maximum nostalgia power, which is awesome. The fighting system doesn't really bring anything new to the table, instead relying on the tried and true heftiness of Resident Evil 4 through 6, with you being able to blast away at your enemies with weapon staples such as the handgun, shotgun, and Desert Eagle, as well as kick some ass in melee by using a machete you discover early on. In addition, there will be times when enemies will grapple you, at which point you'll get a brief quicktime event that, if successful, will allow you to throw them off of you or even kill them instantly, which was super helpful. There's also a dodge roll as a defensive maneuver, which I highly recommend you get used to, since some of the enemies here are going to friggin' eradicate you if you don't get out of their way in time. As a matter of fact, Connection: The Nightmare Within lives up to its genre by truly making you work for your survival. More specifically, with the exception of the basic zombie-like enemies you'll get to clash against, almost every other monstrous variant you'll come across will be a pain in the ass to deal with, especially those glitchy assholes and that liquor wannabe who sometimes decimated me with just 2 hits, and they can be tricky to both avoid and shoot, so keep your wits about you when coming across them. Speaking about enemies, bonus points for this monstrosity that started hunting me early on, which gave me Nemesis shell shock. "Excuse me, sir, can I come in and kill you?" On a last note when it comes to combat, I highly recommend playing the game with mouse and keyboard instead of a controller, since it felt much more efficient for me in relation to aiming fluidity, though do try both to see which works better for you. As expected for a survival horror experience, here you'll get your fair share of logical puzzles, which were mostly great, like this one where you had to match the information received from a poem to the color scheme necessary to open this briefcase. To my surprise, I can't say there was a single conundrum here that felt illogical, which happens frequently in the genre, though there were still a couple that came across as stretching the limits of reason and player perception a bit, like the flashlight statues, which, well, I mean, the solution could have been hinted at a bit better here. In any case, I largely enjoyed tackling the game's puzzles, which is a win in my book. The map was serviceable and clearly showed the blueprint of each area, as well as communicated the completion of each room by color coding them, though it didn't mark your actual location on it, at least not in any way that I could perceive. That being said, the world isn't that big, so I can't say I ever had any issue orienting myself. I do have to mention that bosses were a bit underwhelming in terms of my fights against them, since, aside from the last big bad, which did have a decent moveset at its disposal, the rest felt a bit samey, I suppose. There also weren't that many of them, which was a bummer. Speaking of downsides, for some reason you're not able to actually move things around in your inventory as far as I could deduce, with the only item management process allowed being between your backpack and safe box, which was super inconvenient. As for extras, completing the main story unlocks a brief but fun minigame where you need to destroy destroy 4 different monster nests while fending off against waves of enemies, which did entertain me for the 10 minutes it took me to complete the only stage available, but was nothing to write home about. All in all, Connection: The Nightmare Within was a wonderful little gem of a survival horror game, which I wish would have lasted longer than the 4 hours it took me to finish it with both endings, but still, said 4 hours were incredibly fun. It didn't fully reach the potential promised by its setting, and could have definitely done more creative things with its bosses, but those things don't change the fact that this is a great survival horror experience. This is one of those games that seriously makes you wonder about what the developers would have been able to create with a AAA budget, and I'm truly hoping for a sequel down the line. On a scale of S to F, Connection: The Nightmare Within shoots its way to a coveted B+.